Hello and happy Thursday, everybody. We are really excited that you're here at the AP Lit session today. We're going to be continuing just to dive into prose and talk about ways that we can get into that text and make meaning from it. But before we do, just want to, let me introduce myself first. I'm Susan Barber from Atlanta, Georgia, Grady High School. As always, good to be with you. We're having beautiful spring weather in Atlanta right now. Maybe I'll be outside one day, and when I'm doing this, it's so nice. So we've just been so overwhelmed with emails, just literally all across the world, of people reaching out to us and saying classes are watching from Weston Ranch High School in Stockton, California, Silver Creek High School in San Jose, Phoenix, Arizona, Mr. Maxwell's class in Bozeman, Montana. Heard from some more Alabama people yesterday. Miss Burns from class from Baker High School, loved that. But one email just really touched both of our hearts. And teachers, I want to say, I want to talk to teachers and I want to talk to students. Teachers, we get a lot of email from students, and they are telling us, first of all, just how great their teachers are and how they feel really prepared, and also how much they miss their teachers during this time. So teachers, we are getting a lot of your teacher love from your students. They are really just sharing such heartwarming stories of what y'all do in the classroom every day. And we do know that we're just stepping in to reinforce the work that you've been doing all year. Students, we also just know that this is a hard time for a lot of you. I mean, it's your senior year of high school, and there's just a lot that you're missing. And we heard from a student in Parchment, Michigan, from Miss Keel's class, and they have this student reached out, first of all, to talk about just what a great teacher Miss Keel is, but also how it's just been hard for this particular class, not only with the pandemic, but other things that they've had going on, which I think Mr. Escobar will tell you about. But students, we don't want to minimize this time. We know um, that you're hurting and you're grieving a lot of things now. And so reach out to your teachers. They want to support you not only in content, but they also just want to give you emotional support during this time as well. Mr. Escobar.
Absolutely. How are you guys? My name's Carlos Escobar from Miami, Florida, from Felix Varela Senior High School. And what Ms. Barber's saying is absolutely true. The content is only second to our emotional well-being. You can't learn and we can't teach unless we know that we're okay. And we've been okay because of the emails you've been sending us. And we know that you're going to be okay if you're tuning in, because we have formed this community. I sent an email out saying how much I'm going to miss you guys, how I'm going to miss Miss Barber and everyone that we're working with once this is all over, because it has been therapeutic. It has been helpful because we get to tune everything out and just focus on this. But Miss Keel, you are certainly loved by your students, and all you kids in Michigan, you've dealt with the mosquito issue and the EEE and the PFA, and it's been real tough for you. And perhaps that should give us some perspective that while we've been okay, you guys have been dealing with other issues. And what I told the student was that this is the first time that she can certainly be aware that we're all in it together, and we want to say hello, and we want to say that we understand how you're feeling, and we're feeling it too. Just because you're a grown up doesn't mean that you're not impacted by things, but we're going to be in it together, and we're glad that you have tuned in every single day. So hello to everyone. We're going to update the map. Now it's become a fight. Everyone wants to make it to the map. um, so we're updating the map, and we'll share it with you guys tomorrow. Today, let's get into our homework. All right, we're here to work. And we were looking at the Mulvaney's last night, and we were going to look at different aspects of this, and we weren't writing the essay yet. You may want to take a picture of this because all these colors will make sense in a second once we move over to the chart. This is the chart that we wanted you to look at, because we were talking about different plot structures yesterday, how different pieces of the text fit within each other in terms of where they are positioned and the duration of the time that each of these elements is consuming within the text. So we have some information regarding the order of the events. And if you look at it, we have the identification, the things that we notice, we have the evidence, we have the quotations, and then we try to make some statement about the function of that decision made by the author when it came to how the plot was structured. We want to reiterate at all times that there is no single right answer. There's no single right answer in terms of your observation, for example, of the the evidence that you select or the function of these plot points. However, there is some things that perhaps in the identification and description that we hope that your answers align with our answers a little bit. Um, we hope that you were able to see that there was this manipulation of time, for example, with recalling past events and then moving on to future events. And we want you to have caught on, hopefully, to the stream of consciousness that was certainly critical to how the passage is presented. So again, take a picture of this, compare it to your notes, see how it aligns. All of this will be useful should you write the essay. And that's always the goal, right? Um, you want to talk a little bit more, Miss Barber, about the organization that you saw here?
Yeah, we talked about narrative pacing yesterday and specifically about how much selection of detail is presented. And you really see at the beginning, there's a lot of detail presented. Well, and that really slows the pace down right here. And it's going to allow us to identify with the character. It's going to slow us down and give us time as a reader to think about really what the character, where the character is, what the character is thinking. If we would have just had action, action, action in the plot, we're not really able to um, put ourselves in this character's position and think about that. And again, these are not isolated elements, they all work together. So this selection of detail especially goes back to our setting lesson, and we see how the setting reinforces things that the character is thinking. So all of these fit together. I could talk about this essay for
Yeah,
half
there's
an hour.
there's so much here, and that's good. That means that there's a lot of fodder for you to have picked up on for your homework. But let's go on to what we're talking about today, which is point of view. Okay, and the point of view of the narrator. Both Miss Barber and I have read for the AP exam. We've scored the AP exam in the past, and we can both vouch that many times when students do identify the point of view, that's all they do. They identify the point of view, and that doesn't really take you very far in terms of, you know, earning points, let's say on the rubric, right? There's no row for identify the point of view. The fact that you can identify it tells us that you're prepared then to speak about the function. And we keep going back to that word, the function of the point of view. But that is really difficult if you're not used to doing it. But we're going to break it down for you so that you can say, hey, wait a minute. I know the point of view. I know I can identify it. And truthfully, now that I see these examples, going to the function is not going to take that much work. But
Mhm.
if you've never seen it in action, you may not even know what that looks like. So we're going to talk today about the identification, but then what we say about that identification. Remember, all of these aspects are authorial decisions. The author selected to have this point of view for a reason, and we're going to get to that rationale. Um, and ultimately, we want to have an understanding that identifying and knowing the function of that point of view is significant because it impacts our relationship to the story and thereby how we interpret that story, right? It's all about how the reader is treated by this point of view and how we can filter the information that we're given. So we're going to look at what we mean by all these things during today's lesson.
So I think the way that we'll approach point of view today is thinking about the advantages and the disadvantages of these particular points of view, because then that helps us to be aware as readers of what we're going to gain from this point of view, but also what we might be missing from this point of view. Both of those are equally important. So let's think about first person point of view. So the advantages, and this is not an exhaustive list. You can probably think of more, but here are just some key ones. The advantages is we are able to see events from the perspective of an important character. And it's really good to see things, it's helpful to see things from their point of view. We know how they're processing it in real time often. We know what they're thinking. And that gives us insight into their characterization as well. Some of the disadvantages of first person point of view is oftentimes the narrator's unreliable. And we've already had a lesson on this. And I can't even remember specifically when, but we've talked about narrator reliability. So even if it's in first person point of view, but the narrator has some different biases, they may be naive, um, like we talked about in the Telltale Heart, the narrator opens and says, I'm very nervous, true. You think I'm mad? Let me tell you why I'm not mad. We already know that we're going to have to read this with a critical eye, seeing that his perception may not be exactly reality.
Yeah,
The
I always
other,
think of the scenario of a car accident, for example.
Mhm.
If you were there and you're able to relay the story, that's great because I'm not getting it from a third or a second source. You were there. But if you were the one involved in the car
Mhm.
accident, then there's some biases there, right? You don't want to get the ticket, you don't want to be held liable,
Mhm.
and those things might impact how you remember the story or how you tell the story. So the advantage is huge. You were there, but the disadvantage, which is might you be recalling it correctly, is a huge factor to consider. I think we talked about it with the governess in Turn of the Screw, maybe
Yes.
that if she's a little unstable, as she says so herself, can we believe the story that she's telling us? But I love the example we have down here.
So I'm an 80s person. I graduated high school and college in the 80s. And this song by the Human League, Don't You Want Me, Baby, look it up if you don't know it. I hope y'all are all into your 80s music and know this. But each verse of the first verse gives the guy's perspective of the story. And then the second verse gives her perspective. So we can see exactly how we're only getting one perspective and they each have a different perspective. His story, I was working, these are the same. No, they're not. I was working at a waitress in a cocktail bar. When I met you, you picked me up, you shook me up, you turned me around. And so we see, do I have these mixed up? No, I am so sorry. Okay. Now 5 years later on, you've got the world on your feet. Success has gotten easy for you, but don't forget, it's me who put you where you are now, and you can put me back down too. And so he's saying, I made you who you are, and now you're leaving. And we only have one story. Then we go into the chorus. Now we go to his story. Yeah, I was working as a waitress in the cocktail bar. And she says, that much is true. But even then, now we're getting her side of it. I knew I'd find a much better place, either with or without you.
It's much
The
better if you sing that part, really.
I could sing it. um, and in my class, I showed this video. We can't show it here, but that's what we do. We watch this video and we pause it. What's his story? What's her story? So each one gives us a different perspective. And so it's great to know what he's thinking, what she's thinking, but we have to remember that if we're only seeing it from one point of view, we may not be getting the full story. So be aware of that in first person point of view. Okay. Third person omniscient. There is a second person point of view. We decided not to address that here because it is not utilized very often, but you'll see it in Girl by Jamaica Kincaid. I was even reading the things they carried. There's a section of that. It goes into second person. So every once in a while you will see that, but we decided to not give time to that and talk about the more common ones here. Third person omniscient, all seeing. The advantages. We're going to have access to everything, past, present, future, and we have equal access to all of the characters. There's no discrimination or advantage given to any particular character. So this allows us to make objective decisions on our own about characters. The disadvantage with this is it can feel somewhat impersonal at times because we aren't getting that first person perspective and emotional connection to the character. So, do you want to read this example for us?
Yes.
From
In
Exit West. What a great book if you have not read that.
in a city swollen by refugees, but still mostly at peace, or at least not yet openly at war, a young man met a young woman in a classroom and did not speak to her for many days. His name was Saeed and her name was Nadia, and he had a beard, not a full beard, more a studiously maintained stubble, and she was always clad from the tips of her toes to the bottom of her jugular notch in a flowing black robe. We get the detail, we can draw it, but like you said, it's impersonal. How does he feel about her? How does she feel about him? What do they think about when they look at each other? Are they thinking about each other? We're not, we don't live in any of their hearts at this point.
And so, the question to ask here is, why would the author choose this over the other? These are intentional choices the author makes. There's not a right or a wrong. But why do you think the author would choose this? And again, sometimes, it allows us to see everything and form our own opinions and not feel like maybe something is being shoved down at us or heavy handed, like this is what I want you to feel sometimes, which in a lot of times with first person, we really have that strong character connection and we're led pretty easily to what they want us to feel. Here we have to work a little harder for that.
Yeah, if you want to get a sense of that, maybe pick up the book The Thief and the Dogs by Naguib Mahfouz, and there you see a prisoner being released and his perspective and his worldview, and he's
Mm,
very angry at the world and at his friends and his wife and his daughter and everyone, but you get sucked into his worldview because that's all we get. And then you as a reader have to sort of stand back and say, whoa, 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 wait, what
mhm.
are the biases that this character has, and why is it that he sees the world as he does? But that's what we get in first person primarily,
Mhm.
right? And here we get the opposite. It's this sort of muted um, eh, recalling of events or telling of the story.
So the next one is third person limited. And this is where we still have, it's not directly from the character's perspective, but we are going to have insight into one character's perspective. So the advantages, again, it's broad view, but it does focus in on one character's perspective. And it may be more objective than the first person perspective because we do have this broader view. But the disadvantage is while we're able to focus in on one character, we don't have equal access to full knowledge of all of the characters. So here, Harry Potter, we can't teach AP Lit without talking about Harry Potter. Any literature class, can we, without talking about Harry Potter? Harry had taken up his place at Wizard School where he and his Scar were famous. But now the school year was over. He was back with the Dursleys for the summer, back to being treated like a dog that had rolled in something smelly. The Dursleys hadn't even remembered that today happened to be Harry's 12th birthday. Of course, his hopes hadn't been high. So now we see this little inside into Harry Potter. He didn't really expect it anyway. So we know that little bit about him, even though we have this third person perspective, this third person point of view. Questions to consider when we're thinking about point of view. What biases does the narrator speaker have? How broad or limited is the narrator's perspective? And how do these limitations affect our understanding of events? Are there shifts in perspective? How does the perspective highlight or reinforce a central idea in the text? If a text, what would you lose if a text was told from a different point of view or had a different perspective? And why would the author choose this particular point of view? So point of view perspective, slightly different, but I think now for our discussion and for questions to help you get into a text and roll around and make meaning from it, you can use both of these as ways in. Again, these questions, I don't think it's like a checklist for you to be going through a text and saying, what about this? What about this? What about this? But it does give you some ways into the text. And whichever of these ways you can get into the text, it starts to help you make meaning of the text. And this may be, point of view is one of the easiest ways to jump into a text and be thinking about it. Okay, so here is a chart. Again, not that the graphic organizer is the end all, but it is a way to help you organize your thoughts. What about point of view? What about first person, third person omniscient, third person limited? Why does the author use this? Why do you think? What's our advantage with this point of view? What's the disadvantage? Why do you think the author would choose this? What about the narrator's detailed diction and syntax? What does that tell us about them? How can that relate to point of view? Narrator reliability also falls into this, and narrator's tone and shifts in tone. All of these can be related in this point of view category. So any of these will help you be able to enter in point of view and just think about, why is the story being told from this point of view? What perspective do we have? What advantage does that give us?
And if I were listening to this, what I would do if I'm a student or as a teacher even, I would want to look at all the prompts that I have access to, the prompts in my portfolio, in my folder, the prompts that my teacher is sending me, and maybe do a quick check. Can I identify the point of view in each of these prompts? A, and B, do I have something to say about why the author selected that point of view? And sometimes we can make a stronger argument than at other times, right? And there's no, maybe we should talk about the prompt for a second. Whenever they list such as, and then there's terminology. students have always had questions about that, but of course now the exam is treating that in a different way. But let's just remember that you are the one bringing in the evidence. You are the one saying, this is my claim, and I'm arriving at this claim, or I'm going to support my claim through these observations. So if point of view is something that you think is really driving a point home, then you're going to make an argument about point of view, or you're going to use point of view to support an argument rather. But I think you need to practice this skill a lot more than just with this one video. But you have access to, again, the prompts that your teacher has given you, or look at your bookshelves or think about
Mhm.
the books you've read. What is the point of view in that text? Why was that point of view selected? And if you're having a hard time coming up with the answer to that, then maybe reach out to your teacher at that point to see if maybe you can get more practice than what we're getting here in one video or with what you're able to do on your own. But it is an interesting vehicle, I think, through which to analyze an excerpt or a text.
So let's look at a short excerpt today from The Invisible Man. I am an invisible man. No, I am not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe, nor am I one of your Hollywood ectoplasms. I am a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I'm invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Like the bodiless heads you see sometimes in circus sideshows, it is though I have been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorted glass. I'm sorry, I'm having to move my screen around. When I have been surrounded by mirrors of, what does that word say? Can you see that?
When they approach me,
When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves as figments of their imagination, indeed, and everything except me. Sorry about that, the way my screen's laid out. So when we think of this, let's think automatically. This should be easy. What is the point of view here? It's going to be first person. Well, why do you think Ellison would choose? And we know that from the beginning. I am an invisible man. Now, why do you think this story is told this way? Why do you think he would choose to use this method, this point of view? Already from this paragraph, I think, and this is the opening, and I think we really from the very beginning are going to see the internal conflict like that is introduced immediately, pulled in to the character here. And we know that a lot of this book is going to be not only about the actions that are happening, but it's going to be one of an internal quest and an internal conflict. And that's what this first person point of view allows for us here. Um, we can see other things like if we go to the chart, and again, that's going to show us some of the complexity here. We're always trying to get at the complexity. So again,
and
think.
for the purists
Mhm,
out there, because I'm sure we'll get this email, it's Invisible Man, right? Not H.G. Wells's The Invisible Man.
mhm.
Um, and, and I'm sure we'll get those emails. So don't email us
Thank
for that.
you.
We'll
Yes,
correct it.
I think I'm done.
So we're talking about point of view, right? And we need to recognize the difference between first person point of view and third person point of view, with the understanding that within third person point of view, we have multiple options, right? We can have this omniscient point of view. We can have a limited omniscient point of view. Some of you might talk about the objective point of view with third person, which is when they don't really give any insight. They just sort of comment on what they see without any opinion or delving into the characters' hearts or minds. And then we ask ourselves, well, once I've identified that point of view, where does that place me as a reader? Who truly do I have access to at that point? And do I understand now many of the characters, simply one of the characters. And at that point, how do I assess all these characters? Who is who is informing my opinion? And you have to fight the urge. I mean, a good writer will grab you and force you to have a certain opinion, and you have to wrestle yourself free and say, no, I'm not going to be manipulated by you. And these are some of the strategies that you may have learned in AP language, right? When you're listening to a speech, it's so easy to listen to a speech and become a bobblehead and just follow
Uh,
along, especially if you're not a thinker, right? If you're just accepting it as truth. But if you filter it through a series of understandings, right? People are biased. People have an objective. People have an ability to deceive. Then you're going to arrive at the truth, or at least at your interpretation of things. How does a shift in point of view contribute to the development of a literary element and contribute to meaning? We're trying to arrive at meaning at all
mhm,
times. So let's keep that in mind. So if you cannot make a connection between the point of view that was selected and the meaning of the text, then don't bring up point of view.
mhm.
You're not getting brownie points by simply saying the point of view is third person. There's a metaphor in line 5, and I see a simile in line 7. Where's the analysis, right? Those are observations. Those are things you're looking at, but you're not making the connection. So we have to practice making those connections, and we're going to try to practice them tonight. We're going to look at Elena Maria Viramontes's text here, Under the Feet of Jesus. And Viramontes, if I'm not mistaken, is a professor at Cornell. I think one of my students was her academic advisor. So that was a pretty neat coincidence.
It
And
sounds so much better when you say it than when I say it.
well, you can go ahead and say it, because maybe the way you say it is the way we
No,
ought
no,
to
no,
be
no, no,
saying
no, no,
it.
no, 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 no.
Um,
That's great.
but but under the feet of Jesus, we can all say that, right?
Yes.
And we're going to focus on point of view. Remember what we did with Ludi Johnson and the Street? We read it for characterization. We read it for setting. This time we're reading Viramontes' text for an understanding of what the point of view is, what is the function of that point of view, how does that point of view affect us and our interpretation of the text. What's difficult here is we're teaching all these skills, and we're presenting them really in isolation, right? Today we're dealing with this, and tomorrow we're dealing with that. Well, the task of a reader is nearly impossible, right? You have to take all these skills and apply them to your reading. But that's the beauty of it, the fact that you have so many things at your disposal when you are interpreting these texts. So let's not see it as a disadvantage, but as a great advantage to the process.
And I will say, as we move on into lessons next week and the next week, we are going to be looking more holistically and how do all of these fit together. So we are moving in that direction.
So let's read this. I love this text.
Yeah, I do too. This is one of my favorites. My students have already written on this year.
So what is this? When Estrella first came upon Perfecto's red tool chest like a suitcase near the door, she became very angry. So what is this about? She had opened the tool chest, and all that jumbled steel inside the box, the iron bars and things with handles, the funny shaped objects, seemed as confusing and foreign as the alphabet she could not decipher. The tool chest stood guard, interesting, by the door, and she slammed the lid closed on the secret. For days she was silent with rage. The mother believed her a victim of the evil eye. Again, focus on point of view. Don't get sucked into like the beauty of the language here. Our purpose today is point of view.
Australia hated when things were kept from her. The teachers in schools did the same, never giving her the information she wanted. Estrella would ask over and over, "So what is this?" and point to the diagonal lines written in chalk on the blackboard with a dirty fingernail. The script A's had a curly Q of a pry bar, a hammerhead split like a V. The small I's resembled nails. "So tell me." But some of the teachers were more concerned about the dirt under her fingernails. They inspected her head for lice, parting her long hair with ice cream sticks. They scrubbed her fingers with toothbrush until they were so sore she couldn't hold a pencil properly. They said good luck to her when the Pisco was over, reserving the desk in the back of the classroom for the next batch of migrant children. Estrella often wondered what happened to all the things they boxed away in tool chests and kept to themselves.
She remembered how one teacher, Mrs. Horn, who had the face of a crumpled Kleenex and a
Hmm.
nose like a hook, she did not imagine this, asked how come her mama never gave her a bath. Until then, it had never occurred to Estrella that she was dirty. That the wet towel wiped on her resistant face each morning, the vigorous brushing and tight braids her mother neatly weaved were not enough for Mrs. Horn. And for the first time, Estrella realized words could become as excruciating as rusted nails piercing the heels of her bare feet.
The curves and the tails of the tools made no sense, and the shapes were as foreign and meaningless to her as chalky lines on the blackboard. But Perfecto Flores was a man who came with his tool chest and stayed, a man who had no record of his own birth except for the year 1917, which appeared to him in a dream. He had a history that was unspoken, memories that only surfaced in nightmares. No one remembered knowing him before his arrival, but everyone used his name to describe a job well done.
He opened up the tool chest as if bartering for her voice, lifted a chisel and hammer, aquí, pegarle aquí, to take the hinge pins out of the hinge joints when you want to remove a door. Start with the lowest hinge, tap the pin here from the top, tap upwards. When there's too many layers of paint on the hinges, tap straight in with a screwdriver at the base. Here, where the pins widen. If that doesn't work because your manitas aren't strong yet, fasten the vice pliers these. Then twist the pliers with your hammer.
Perfecto Flores taught her the names that went with the tools. A claw hammer, he said with authority, miming its function. Screwdriver, C, holding up various heads and pointing to them. Crescent wrenches, loop pliers like scissors for cutting chicken or barbed wire. Old wood saw, new hacksaw, sledgehammer, pry bar, chisel, axe, names that gave meaning to the tools. Tools to build, bury, tear down, rearrange, and repair, a box of reason his hands took pride in. She lifted the pry bar in her hand, felt the coolness of iron and power of function, weighed the significance it awarded her, and soon she came to understand how essential it was to know these things. That was when she began to read. Oh,
As
that's such a great passage.
yeah, as powerful as it is, right? We have to keep our eye on the task, and the task is point of view. So these are the questions we want you to answer. We're not looking right now for perfectly written responses. We're not looking for an essay. Just jot down some ideas on these questions. What is the point of view of this passage? How, and remember, we're speaking about narrator, right? Who is the one telling us the story? How do you know? What is the advantage of this point of view from this passage? What do we miss using this point of view? You may want to rewind the video, the recording, and look at the advantages and disadvantages for each of the options, and that'll be informative for you. And why might Viramontes have chosen this point of view for this story? For the story, and the easiest way I think to answer that is, what would we miss if it were told from a different point of view? If you ponder that for a bit, then you're going to understand why Viramontes might have chosen this particular point of view. So this is your homework, and we look forward to your responses tomorrow. We're going to work with the same passage tomorrow as we look at
Mhm.
contrasts, and that's going to be the topic for tomorrow. And we're going to get into that and what we mean by that tomorrow. But as always, if you know someone out there who doesn't have technology, who's missing connectivity or devices, we're 4 weeks away from the AP exams, but now is when it matters too, because these kids need to be connected with their teachers and with us. So please do your friends a favor and reach out to cb.org/tech so that those issues could be resolved. Ms. Barber, it's always a pleasure to work with you.
Yep, same for you. And class of 2020, we love y'all. So see you tomorrow.